I think what we've seen from the start is a move towards a greater transparency. I mean, it's not suddenly a case of, bring in the cameras, lights, camera action, but I mean, the things like the Accession Council, never before seen Privy Council live on TV, a greater sense of, okay, we've got to, as one of his team said, we've got to sweat the assets. Let's make these palaces, work. Let's get things going through. I mean, sometimes these days you might get 2 really big receptions in a day. King will be at both of them. There's slightly more of an atmosphere of, there's less protocol about the place. There's less, some would call it flummery. I mean, he is a very traditional person. I mean, he believes very strongly that you've got to do things properly and right, but it doesn't always mean that everything's got to be white tie, or that people have to have sort of formal reception lines and all that sort of thing. And I think there's also all those who said he was going to be a bit of a loose cannon, that he was going to cross the political line and stray into politics. And, I don't know what they were expecting from someone who's been the heir to the throne longer than anyone in history, but he had a pretty good idea of what he could and couldn't do and how he was going to do it, and that's what we've seen. I think the role of Queen Camilla is absolutely crucial to ensuring a happy court. A happy monarch is a happy court, and she brings a sort of freshness of of course she's a queen, he's a king, but there's an informality there. There's a general common sense approach. She's got a great sense of humour. She makes him laugh, makes lots of people laugh, and you might be at a rather stiff event and things are running a bit behind schedule. And everyone's a bit terrified of sort of going up to the king and saying, "Look, sir, could you hurry up, please?" Because they're all a bit worried. And she's the one that an official can say, "Ma'am, I think we're a bit behind schedule." She'll, "Oh, right, don't leave it to me," and she'll literally go up and sort of poke him and say, "Come on," and they can laugh about things afterwards. They love outdoors, walking, gardens. They've got very sort of shared interests, and she's a classic case of never complain, never explain, just get on with it. And you look at the impact she's had on those organisations she gets involved with. I mean, they adore her. Her regiments think she's great. All her charities, very glad to have her on board. But inside the palace, there are big changes going on in terms of what happens to Buckingham Palace now. It's undergoing huge refurbishment. When that's finished, I think we're going to see a different sort of Royal HQ. It'll still be Royal HQ, but I think it'll be busier. I think it'll be more open to the public. Not all the time, but I think there'll be more sort of access. And I think rather like the Queen used to believe in sort of incremental change, but well thought through, I think that's going to carry on. We're going to carry on seeing small changes. There isn't going to be some huge image relaunch, because it's not a brand of cornflakes. It does its own thing. One of the questions people always ask is, "Oh, the King must be so upset about Harry," and to a lesser extent, Andrew. And obviously for us in the media, that's a sort of recurring story. The fact is that he's got so much on his plate as monarch. Yes, I mean, he is sad about the fact that his son has decided to start a new life abroad and do so in quite a radical way, and write his book and do his TV stuff, and of course he's sad about that. But you've got to stand back and remember that this is an institution that is used to getting all sorts of public problems hurled at it very publicly, and so it's not all-consuming. He doesn't, well, I don't know. I don't speak to him on a daily basis, but I mean, as far as I can, talking to those who do, he doesn't wake up every morning going, "Oh, what am I going to do about Harry today?" It's just not. It's one of umpteen things to have to think about. But I think there is as I say in the book, he's got a good ability to kind of compartmentalise the sort of the problems, you know, what's family, what's constitutional, what's royal, what can I actually do something about, what are the things that are frankly outside my control. You put all these things into different brackets, and there isn't much you can do at the moment vis-a-vis, you know, what's going on in California. So I think there's a sense of, well, we'll just have to see what happens. But in the meantime, I'm getting on with the job. What else can he do, really? I think with the Duke of York, there will always be a sense that, I mean, what an appalling lack of judgment in A, becoming friends with somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, and then B, not unfriending him as sooner, and actually still seeing him for as long as he did. But at the same time, you know, the Duke of York has always said that, you know, he hasn't done anything wrong, and that is the sort of, you know, he's part of the family. One thing he hasn't done, he's remained, you know, loyal to the crown, to the family, to the monarchy. He hasn't gone nuclear and sort of, you know, written books and things. And I think there's a sense that he is a much diminished figure who has really gone through an extraordinary exile process from public life to the point that he really, you know, apart from turning up at occasional family events, that's it. And I think the king is, like the Queen, late Queen was, is fundamentally a Christian, forgiving, big tent kind of person who believes that, you know, let's try and make things work rather than sort of saying, right, that's it, you're out. So a lot of talk has been directed at, you know, well, why is Prince Andrew still in Royal Lodge, this big house he lives in? Well, I mean, he's got the lease on it. People say, well, why doesn't the king kick him out? Well, it's not as simple as that. And actually the issue is one of cost. It's a very expensive house to protect. While it had public figures, public royalty living in it, then that was a legitimate public expense. But now Prince Andrew plays no part in public life. He's not a public figure, therefore it's not a legitimate public expense. Therefore, if he wants to stay there, he's going to have to pay for it. And it's very expensive, so he probably won't. In my book, I've discussed the differences in character between Prince William and the King, the similarities, how he differs. And one of the most interesting things I found, he doesn't have that sense of the spiritual. He's just not very interested in religion. He's not, as someone put it to me, he's not instinctively comfortable in a faith environment. I mean, of course he respects church. He goes to church when he has to, Easter and Christmas, like I would say a very large part of the population. But he's not a regular devout communicant. And that obviously has implications for someone who is destined to become Supreme Governor of the Church of England. Now, just because he doesn't like going to church doesn't mean he's going to sever the connection. That's not what I say in the book, but it does, you know, it raises questions about his interest in the church, and it means that in the event that there is in future some sort of debate about disestablishing the church, it's the sort of thing that comes around from time to time. What I say in the book is that it will be of less concern to him than it would have been to his father and certainly to his grandmother, the Queen, late Queen. I think one of the things we saw very early on after the death of Elizabeth II is just how important the Princess Royal is to the whole modern, current royal system and the slimmed-down monarchy. She's absolutely central. If you look at those coronation photographs, the official ones, you know, who is standing at the king's right-hand shoulder? It's his sister. She's the only person, other than him, who was there inside Sandringham House on the night that George VI died and Elizabeth II became Queen. Elizabeth II was out in Africa, but the grandchildren, Charles and Anne, were staying with their grandparents. And so she's been part of this extraordinary story more than anybody else, all the way through. Utterly dependable, utterly reliable, plain talking, says, I mean, you know, when in the interviews I've done with her over the years, I said in the interview, which is in this book, you know, she says, look, we don't agree on everything, but we agree on the main things. And she's, she's I think very, you know, when you look back to that extraordinary journey of the Queen's final journey as the coffin is sort of travelling through the Highlands, you know, who's in the car behind? It's Princess Royal. Who's accompanies the coffin down to London? Who accompanies the coffin on its last journey down to Windsor? You know, the King's got to do all the sort of stuff that kings have to do, but here you've got this thoroughly dependable royal stalwart who's just sort of always been there. And I thought it was very telling on the day of the coronation, you know, when everyone else was processing back to Buckingham Palace in the rain, in carriages and coaches and cars. There's the Princess Royal on a horse, because her role is she's Royal Colonel of the Blues and Royals. They're a cavalry regiment. It gives her the honorary title of Gold Stick. It means she's a royal bodyguard, and she's damn well going to be a royal bodyguard. And there she is in the rain with a gold stick riding a horse, and that's no one's going to stop her. There was a very touching story that was recalled to me about in those moments after the death of Her late Majesty, and you can just imagine everyone is in a state of, you know, great sadness, shock, and the Princess Royal is like anyone else. She's very moved at this moment, and so one member of staff thought, well, the correct thing to do would be to offer and give her a hug, and that happens, and there's a brief hug, and then in a very Princess Royal kind of way, she says, well, I think that's the last time that's ever going to happen. And that, I think, is such a sweet story. It tells you all you need to know about her, about, you know, yes, she's like all of us, she's human, she's royal, and she's just the Princess Royal, and let's hope she never changes. As a historian, as well as a journalist, you know, I love history, I love archives, and it was a great privilege to get inside the Royal Archives to look at all the files on 1953, so that one could compare all the planning and the arrangements this time around, because I mean, most people can't remember the coronation of 1953. I certainly couldn't. I wasn't born for some time afterwards, and seeing certain things exactly the same, endless rows about seating plans, ticketing arrangements, who's invited, who's not invited, who sits where, who wears what. Those are all big things in both 53 and in 2023. But what you realise is just how different society is now. I mean, in 2023, most people in the Abbey were on their own. There was no +1 invitation because there wasn't room. There were health and safety wouldn't allow building of gantries all around the Abbey. So instead of a congregation of 8,000, it was 2,000. Back in 1953, the entire hereditary peerage expected to be there in all their finery, both lords and ladies. Not anymore, just a handful of them. And yet it still felt like a ceremony kind of utterly rooted in thousands of years of history. I mean, bits of the coronation rite go right back to the book of Exodus. Some of it goes back to the book of Solomon. The basic workings out of the service, the actual structure of the service, goes back to the 10th century coronation of King Edgar in Bath. I mean, you know, this is something that is you know, William the Conqueror looks quite modern in the sort of scheme of coronation things. And yet the king kept all that, but at the same time, this was the first coronation where you had women in proper central important roles, where you had people of other faiths. You had all the main faiths playing a part somewhere in the proceedings. And huge involve all the minority communities of Britain. You know, the idea was let's incorporate 21st century Britain, not let's make this sort of a royal posh thing. And I thought it was a fascinating blend of ancient and modern, and I think it worked.